What can you tell me about yourself and your Irish roots?
Well, my husband, I'm a fully American. So
Oh, okay.
my dad is Italian, and my mother, um, well, he's Italian American, and then my mother is from Southern Missouri and moved to Chicago where she met my dad, and she's Irish, English, Welsh. So my roots are farther back. My husband, his mom and dad are from County Mayo, Ireland, and so that is where my connection is come from. And my husband's mom is the oldest of 10. And
Mhm.
so we've had lots of opportunity to go back. My husband's been back and forth like 30 times. It's kind of like going to Toledo, just going to see family. So when John asked me to write, I think it's like going on 16 years ago, I've been doing this every month in my column, Blowin. My father-in-law, he is passed, 20 years now, and he would always call me a blow-in because when you're new to a place, especially his island, Eckle Island, that's what they would call you, a blow-in. But I knew he meant it affectionately, so I thought, well, that's kind of a cool idea for
Right.
a column. And when John said, hey, do you want to write, we were at the Cleveland Fesh, my kids all Irish dance, and he's like, do you want to write a column, because he knew I wrote, and my master's in English, whatever. And I'm like, sure, what do you want me to write about? And he's like, anything, whatever you want. I'm like, okay, good. So perfect, blowing in. As long as people keep wanting to read my blather, I'll keep doing it.
That's awesome. That's good to
Yeah.
know. So, how did you connect with John? And
Well,
how
we
did you just come about? Yeah, go ahead.
knew each other,
Okay.
through the Irish community, the Irish American Club, and
Mhm.
our mutual families. And so, yeah, everybody in the west side of Cleveland, they all know each other.
Small
So,
world.
yeah,
Got it.
absolutely.
Okay, that's awesome. So I know you mentioned that you write about anything and everything, but what is it particularly that inspires you and you focus on?
Um, well, I think I have a background in literature, and I've always
Mhm.
loved English literature. I've had a unique opportunity in that I grew up in Chicago. My mom is from a farm in southern Missouri, and I think when my husband and I first met, we were both connected by our love of the country, farms and animals. Whereas my uncle was a dairy farmer, my uncle Pat, well, and his uncle Tommy is a sheep farmer. So, it was a nice connection. And so I'm inspired, I think, by family, travel, um, literature, food, anything and
Mhm.
everything. I like to think in my writing, it's like a human connection. I love to write about nature, um, relationships. And so when I write, I don't know, I try for like it's kind of a conversational tone. And it's also a neat time for me to try out my own creative fiction. So some of my columns, I've created like a little world called Black Rock, or not Black Rock, sorry, Rock Strand. And it's like these little families live there. And so I've written fictionally about some of their adventures and some of my poetry. It's been a nice place for me just to put it out there and connect it to my writing.
That's
So
that's
basically, long
awesome.
story short, yeah, it human connections. I think what inspires me is a human, and beautiful things, words, animals, family.
That's great. Thanks so much for sharing. That's beautiful. So what is your most loved story so far?
Wow. Yeah, that's a big one. Uh,
Yeah.
that's hard to say because in 16 years, being an English major, I can't do the math
Mhm.
readily. That's a lot of columns. I think two of my favorite creative pieces, I have to say, again, with this little story, this village I've created. And again, I have like five of their stories, but these twins, Petey and Patty Corrigan, and they got into all sorts of mischief. And it's a lot of fun, like playing with the dialogue. One was a Halloween story, and the two get scared to death because they're telling each other stories, and they're going to have a play at school, and they're so excited about the village, the fete that they have, the little shop in the village for come Halloween. And in it they see their neighbor Mrs. McCracken, um, like her underpants are swinging in the wind on a clothesline. And in Ireland, everybody dries their clothes, which never really are dried because as soon as they dry, rain comes. So they're scared to death. Dusk is falling. They see this giant thing hanging and blowing in the wind. They think it's a ghost. And then the little girl who is the love interest, one little boy said, you fool, that's Mrs. McCracken's panties, funny little humor. So that's probably one of my favorite stories. And then my other favorite story, a Halloween one, it's based on a Selkie myth. So it's a little creepy. It is creepy. It's called The Drowning. Two of my favorite things I've ever written. Now, as far as my nonfiction, because I write so much memoir, boy, it's just, I don't know. I like so many of the things. I like when I can bring people from the past who have died back to life. So when I've written about my father-in-law, and when you go into Ackle Island, there is an alley of rhododendron, and it was in bloom right after he passed, and we go through in May, all this purple. It's just like magnificent. So I like bringing him back to life through the stories that he's told me. And I do write about that extensively. I love writing about my mom, who passed a few years back. In the lake house where she and my dad live on Crooked Lake. So much fun to bring life back to these stories. And I like to think for my own kids, even though they're not kids, they're in their 20s, that it's like our family history. It's here, but in a creative way. It's my take on everything, so again, it's infused. Sadness is infused with beauty, and the two live together. And that's what I like to write about most, family, nature, and my little made up stories about these two silly little boys, Petey and Patty. So
that's so beautiful. I have goosebumps. Oh my gosh. It's so funny to me because I am an English major myself, and I've never really spoken to another person who's done their English major and also write at the same time. I know you mentioned that you teach a creative writing course, but you have so much passion about your writing and the way you speak. It's so inspiring. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing.
join my class at Bay Arts. We have
Well,
so
I would love
fun.
to. I would love to. We should talk more about it.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I do have one last question for you. I know I promised I wouldn't take too much of your time.
you're fine.
So you did mention about your creative writing class. Do you think you could share more about what made you teach that class and where you teach it?
Yeah, it was kind of a dream of mine to teach a creative writing class for adults, something that's laid back, we're not worrying about footnotes, and we don't have John O'Brien telling us that if we have two spaces, which we used to have in the old days, and now one space. I'm teasing John out there in the ether. I know you can always hear me. Just joking, but it's just a place for people like-minded folks like ourselves who like to talk books, are closet writers and helping you find your voice. So I went to Nancy Heaton, who's our director at Bay Arts, and because I did volunteering there, my kids took classes there, and I'm like, what do you think about starting a writer's salon? And based in that traditional writer's salon sense, where we sit and we talk about ideas and letters and help create. And it's been wonderful. She's like, sure, I think that sounds great. So I started that at Bay Arts, and I'm forever grateful to Nancy Heaton for giving me that opportunity. And over the years, I've had so many people, people of all generations, and we do it, how should I say, each season, spring, summer, winter, fall, is a new session. So it gives me an opportunity I base the classes around different themes. Again, with autumn coming up, we're going to look at, we always do some kind of spooky writing or detectives. We did cozy mysteries one year, historical fiction with a bent toward the supernatural. We're going to look at motifs, because I like to include my, teaching of English in with that. And, how can we use motifs to, that recreation of idea, of theme, like Hamlet and blood imagery. How can we bring that to our own writing and make it cool and make our writing more multi-dimensional? So each season we do that. And one of my favorite groups I had this old man, and he was in his 80s, and his parents had died, and he was raised by his Irish grandmother. And he had nothing but sisters, and he was the baby. And as you can imagine how loved he was, and he was the sweetest man. But we did an activity where I brought in scents from the garden, a tomato vine, lavender, different fragrances, and we passed them around. And because scents is the strongest, it evokes memory more so than any other scents that we have. So I brought them around, and Paul had the lavender, and we all then wrote. Well, what he
Mhm.
wrote was beautiful. It was about his Irish grandmother and how she had white hair that hung past her back, and she would brush her hair with lavender water. And that is one of my absolutely favorite memories. And he passed on a couple of years after that. But wow, like his story will always be with me. I had another gentleman, so funny. His name was Francis, and Francis had such a sense of humor. And I said, well, tell us something, write a little story that tells us about you without you telling, show us. So he wrote
Mhm.
this little story about this little boy who he was, or Francis was one of four Francises, but he was the only one who went by Frank. So hysterical. And so Frank was great. He was in the welding business, and his kids gave him this gift
Mhm.
card, and he wanted to do ceramics, but he decided to try writing. We would always joke. It's like if he didn't, pay attention to his grammar, I was going to send him to the ceramics class. So you get to know people when they take your class over the years. And so his very last class, we did, our session was in April for National Poetry Month, and it was all poetry. And it was based on this photograph of his grandson walking across a bridge. And the bridge, his other grandson had taken, and the bridge had like rainbow tiles. Well, the story goes on, and Frank created his most beautiful piece he ever wrote was his grandson succumbed to overdose and died. And it was like,
Yeah.
like powerful. And so for me to have this man write this and to just be able to share, I've had surgeons in my class, I have had high school kids, and everybody, it crosses the generations, but the combining force is a love for ideas
Mhm.
and openness, acceptance for one another,
Right. Mhm.
and a want to keep writing, and to explore how beautiful words can be. I always tell my writers, you have to have darkness and light. You cannot have light without darkness, and that is always what we look for in our writing. So that's a little bit about my class, and I'm still doing it. As I said, as long as they can listen to me blather, I'm there.
Oh, this is wonderful. I feel like I'm gonna take you up on that offer and probably join that class pretty soon. So, like you
Yeah,
mentioned, I
great.
am I'm one of the closeted writers myself. I write a lot about trauma, pain, relationships, heartbreak, but I've never able to kind of put it out there.
Yeah,
It's for me, and it kind of like it's like self-therapy maybe.
yeah,
It kind of just I just let my emotions out
yeah.
through writing, but sometimes I feel like I want a community around my writing. Um, I'm really afraid of that criticism or what people are going to say. So that's why I've kept it to myself so far. But I would really love it if you and I could talk more about this someday, sometime
Great.
soon. And
Absolutely.
hopefully, yeah, we could just, I could just take your class.
Yeah, you would love it.
Yeah.
One of my
Yeah.
younger gals is 25, and she just
Oh,
graduated from
wonderful.
Case, Molly,
Okay.
and she's wonderful. We had our class ended for the summer, but we met and had a pizza and salad share,
How
Chinese
sweet.
pizza next to Bay Arts, and everybody got to talk. And again,
Yeah.
25-year-old, two young mothers who have become friends, and then my
Mhm.
other gal Julie, who's she's in her 70s, and she's just wonderful. She is so secret funny, and she writes a blog. She writes 400 words a day, and she's amazing. Like, she's so committed.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's just a bunch of neat people. As I said, we're all connected though by writing. And to go back to John O'Brien, as much grief as he and I give each other over the years, it's that commitment to it, the iIrish is getting your stories out there. And to me, what is
Yeah.
most rewarding is when people come back to me and they're like, oh, wow, how did, I'm so glad you did this. This reminds me of when I was young, or this is about this, or I love the story of love that you told here. It's all these little, ideas in the way my mind works, which is kind of crazy. Um, and just yesterday at Heinen's, one of my columns, I think it was my April, it's called Tasting the Sea. And I featured one of my original poems about a stone crab. And then it went on to an interview that I had conducted with, his name's Tom McIntyre, and he owns Kate's Fish in the West Side Market. And Tom and I have known each other for a bit. And I saw him at Heinen's. I'm like, boy, Tom, you're never safe. I'm like, I haven't seen you in ages. And he's like, I said, what's going on? He said, everything. I just had another baby and we moved. I'm like, oh my gosh. And he's like, I haven't touched a fish. And I'm like, well, you have too many other things going on. So we were talking. He's like, hey, thanks for the story that you wrote about me. Boy, you make me seem like this amazing fishmonger. And I'm like, well, you are, he's 6'4", he cuts a fine figure.
Mhm.
And his dad is in Donegal now, and he's like, they brought a bunch of copies, hard copies back. So if John ever wants to go fully digital, not a good idea, because in the old country they like having something in their hand and then they could hang it up,
Right.
the pubs and the restaurants, and they enjoy passing around. He's like, my dad, I just talked to him, they're passing it around to all the family and they're so happy, and my dad is so proud of me, and thank you so much for my column. So I said, you are welcome. That's what I like to hear. And I thank John O'Brien for giving me the opportunity and saying, it's kind of a loaded question. You can write
Yeah.
anything you want. Really? Still not happy that he didn't allow me to write about this salamander that's actually found in South America. It's in a cave, and it's an albino. It's never seen the light of sun. And
Mhm.
it's eyeless. It's the most incredible thing. And of course, I take things and tie them in all sorts of ways. It's like, this is an Irish American News magazine. What does this have to do about this albino salamander? I'm like, everything. I'm going to work it in though. Sometime.
Yeah.
I'm going to sneak it in. I'm just going to pretend and use my poetic license.
Uh-huh.
And when you hear this, and it's going to live like, it's going to be in some one of those prehistoric, like, bogs.
Yeah, you should go right ahead. That's gonna be
Poetic
awesome.
license. We all have one. So there you go.
Good to know that you have something you can hold against John. Don't
That's
tell him
right.
I said that
No,
though.
it's like, yeah, don't just edit that out. I mean,
Yeah,
you're
yeah, you
done. You
got
know
it.
how to do those things.
Yeah, yeah. Oh
Well,
wow, this talk was so I feel like I needed this, and just to hear your stories and your perspective, I'm just so grateful for the time you spent today. Thank
thank
you
you.
so much for doing this. I'll definitely be in touch.
Yeah, do you have
And
all my info? And
yes,
I'm pretty good on emails that I will
awesome.
mess up too badly.
Okay, great. I'll be in touch and I'm hoping we can talk and meet soon.
Well, you too. And take care and enjoy
Thank
your
you.
summer when you're not all hooked up and working.
Yeah, I'll
Go
try.
out, all those flowers, find some lavender, rub it in your
Yeah,
hand.
I should.
Rosemary is good too.
I
Take care.
will keep it in mind. Thank you so much.
You're
Bye.
welcome. Bye.